A big thing with this Phoenix platform was that it was supposed to have a new powertrain and not some old GM thing. Peter, you worked, we've met with the MLU project and a bunch of fun things, but it didn't end up being a Saab engine for that.
No, to make a long story short, I've worked at Saab for many years, since 1994, and at GM as well. I had an assignment to develop a new V6 diesel engine for GM.
When was this?
This was around 2006 to 2008. Okay. The end of 2008. In 2008, things started to go worse for GM. So they shut down a lot of projects. And this diesel engine that we had been working on for about 2.5 years, it was ready to go into production. But it was cancelled just when it was finished. So it wasn't very fun to see that. It was tough.
It was tough. It was supposed to come in
It was supposed to be in Saab's cars as well. They are both in the 941.
9X? Right, 9X, absolutely. Because it needed a diesel. At that time, SUVs were supposed to have diesels. It only came with a petrol engine, as I recall. A 6-cylinder. I actually drove it in the US.
Yeah, that's right.
It was new. The European market probably needed a diesel.
It probably needed a diesel. And then it was supposed to come in the Saab 9.5, the new generation, and in the Opel Insignia. And actually in the Cadillac CTS as a rear-wheel drive variant with a longitudinal engine. So it was quite a big operation where they tried to get an engine that could be mounted both transversely and longitudinally to make it work with different gearboxes and so on.
Was it good then?
It was actually a very nice engine. And what actually happened was that it ended up together with a company called V-Motori. And they sold the engines onto the Fiat group. So it's in Jeep range Cherokee, and it was in Maserati and in a number of different cars within that group. So the engine ended up being used in other cars. A little bit modified. I had an engine compartment that was from GM, and they changed that, and then it became a 3-liter instead of the 2.9-liter that we had. But that was kind of the origin of it, because then I came back home to Sweden, and I said to my boss, who was Charles Bergström, CEO of Powertrain, I said to him, well, there's nothing to do. What should I do? And he was a bit forward-thinking then, when you could see that GM was starting to struggle. And he said, there's a big risk here that we might actually have problems with engines from GM in the long run. We have to find a new engine, and it needs to fit Saab's next generation in the E3. It's the 540 project we're still talking about at that point.
Phoenix.
That's right. And we put together a team, and then we started looking at what engines and suppliers there are in the world. And pretty soon we narrowed it down from a list where there are well over 1,000 engines worldwide. Maybe not all of them are available for purchase, but at least there are that many being produced around the world. And then there are different specs for the same engine. So it's not like there are 1,000 completely different engines. But if you look at all the power levels and variants available, there are quite a few to choose from. Pretty quickly, we narrowed it down to a list of between 10 and 20 engines. It was quick to cross them off. 6 lines of engines.
What requirements?
Basically, it was to replace and preferably improve the engine we had in the 9.3. And that was the base engine in the 9.3. A turbocharged 4-cylinder engine.
Were you satisfied with it?
Yes, in many ways. However, we always tried to improve the fuel consumption. We always had trouble managing the emissions. They were always right on the limit. A lot of engineering work went into keeping them below the threshold values. We would have liked to have an engine where it was possible to disconnect more auxiliary equipment or whatever you want to call it to reduce fuel consumption. And GM didn't have that at the time. So those were some of the characteristics. Then there was the fact that we wanted to keep the characteristic turbo feel in the engine, even if we weren't specifically looking for turbo lag itself. So we still wanted to retain that turbo feeling where you get good low-end torque and a fairly linear torque buildup that remains constant over a wide RPM range. And preferably an engine that is lighter. The lighter the engine, the easier it is with the chassis brakes and everything else. So you scale down as much as possible. So we were working with downsizing long before it was actually called downsizing, with turbo engines and not going for 6 cylinders, sticking with 4 cylinders and a turbo engine. You
get into it.
Yes, so it was in that spirit. You could say it was about continuing in that spirit. And then we came up with a number of engines that we examined in depth. There were about 4 or 5 engines that we examined thoroughly. In the end, it came down to the engine that's in this car now. It's currently used by 2 different major companies, i.e. in Europe.
Here sits the beauty.
One is the PSA group, which we approached first and talked to, and the other is BMW. And when we realized that much of the design and the actual engine was with BMW, we went to them and talked about how they might consider supplying engines to Saab.
And what did they say at BMW?
Absolutely, they said, you
want money. It wasn't as competitive as one might have thought. No, but you were thinking of letting our fine engines go, or...
I don't think they saw us as direct competitors. I don't know if they saw it as a great business deal, but they did see it as a contribution to their development budget. So they were positive. So we started collaborating around 2009, the middle or end of 2009. And pretty soon, during the winter between 2009 and 2010, we decided to build a prototype and got an engine from BMW. And at that point, they were actually a bit impressed with us because they came up 3 weeks after they had sent the engine to see how we were doing. And then we went out and drove with the engine in a car and installed it more or less like this.
Was it an engine and gearbox package?
Yes, it was. It was a package, and it was a GM gearbox that we still use today.
Were you allowed to do that?
Yes. This was long before the bankruptcy.
Okay, I
understand. So it was an F40 gearbox that was paired with the engine then. But they thought it was fantastic to get it in and make it drivable in 3 weeks. And we're known for being a bit quick here in Trollhättan. No,
we are, yes.
Still.
The Saab crew?
Not under Saab's management. So a really nice engine. The starting point was an engine called the Prince engine. And this one is probably called the N18. And it's basically the same engine at its core, but it's the next generation.
And Prince, what is that?
Well, Prince, it's called the Prince engine. I don't know why.
Okay.
Fully controllable valves. Disconnectable. Water pump and position-controlled oil pump. So several of these controls that we would like to have in order to reduce consumption, above all, and also emissions, are present in this engine.
1.6?
1.6 liters and turbocharged then. And we talked about 3 power levels, 160, 190, 220 horsepower. And also about further development for ethanol, because that was a bit of a hallmark of this era, that you had ethanol operation, or actually E85, in many cars. And BMW didn't have that. So they were positive about developing it, even if we had to cover the development costs for such an engine. So that work was started as well. And then we gradually got more engines. We built a number of prototypes. They went into these cars that we're talking about now, actually. The mules that were for the 540.
Right, so they were built in the old Saab 9.3 cars?
Yeah.
Like that one over there, for example.
Exactly.
That's right. And also quite a lot of bench testing where we had engines mounted in our test benches over there in the engine lab.
Did you do anything like that to give it more of a Saab feel?
No, we didn't do that. However, the engine control program was modified a bit to give it more of a Saab character. But the engine is very well optimized from the start. We actually discovered that when we took this mule, the first mule we built, and put it in the emissions lab and said, let's test it. And we know that when we've run engines before, it's always the case that you end up at maybe 110 to 120% of the legal requirement. And in this case, we ran it and ended up at what is normally our development targets. That is far below what is required by law. So the starting point from the beginning was incredibly much better.
The emissions?
Yes, emissions above all. And fuel consumption followed along with the engine installation. Yes, that's
right. And the weight was lower?
Yes, it's lower too. I don't remember by how much.
Unique from 2 liter to inline 6?
Yes, that's correct. Both were 2 liters.
It was a small difference as well?
Yes.
Did you get the same torque and so on? Yes.
There was a lot of discussion about that beforehand. How are we going to manage to get going? Because it's always that initial torque that's the tricky part. But it worked well. Engines are designed in many different ways. These fully controllable valves add another dimension. So you can run the engine with pretty good low-end torque, even though it's only 1.6 liters.
It was a pretty good match between BMW and Saab, right?
It was perfect.
At the time when
we worked with the BMW engineers, their mindset was quite similar to Saab's. And that was something we weren't really used to before.
Compared to GM?
No, exactly. And it was a lot about, well, let's try it. If it was a Saab, he was a bit unsure, but let's try it. And then you see what the result will be. instead of dismissing ideas right from the start, because that's what we've done before, or we don't think it will work. More of a positive attitude.
That sounds really good to me, honestly. It is perfect.
Yes, as I said, we also got a number of engines up here. 100
pieces, right? About 100.
The various engines we had here during that difficult period when it was time for Saab to officially file for bankruptcy.
Time for that? Yes.
So there was, of course, a bit of friction around that since we had engines that BMW had delivered here.
Yes, I understand that. But it's those engines that are in this car, and these cars are going to be built. Those are the ones Saab bought at that time. It
could be some of those engines. Those are the engines that came up to Saab during that time.
It's also provenance, a bit of history, simply put.
Yes, absolutely. So we're looking forward to Anders and the ongoing projects here. Because not everything is simple. Among other things, integrating the engine is not easy. Because if you look at how the electronics work and the communication with the rest of the car, the engine is one version and the car is a completely different version.
It's the Phoenix engine, so to speak, and this is the Saab 9.3 car.
That's right. So the electrical architectures are completely different and they have to meet somewhere. And I'll gladly hand that over to Anders.
Yes, before he does that. How did it feel when so much happened? You had worked so much and done so many things. How was...
To be honest with you, it wasn't something that was entirely unexpected because we had actually been at it for the last 6 months and come up with some projects to keep focused on things to do, to keep the organization going. So those of us working as project managers, and quite a few managers as well, saw that we couldn't just sit down and twiddle our thumbs. So we did a number of projects, including one where we tuned cars to see where the limits are, to challenge things a bit more. So we had a car that we ran on 100% ethanol, a V6. That was a lot of fun. 450 or 460 horsepower, I think it was.
Was that really all it was?
Koenigseggs.
There? No, that was before. But you were also around during the Koenigsegg era and talked with him about old engines and stuff and about the future.
Yes. I felt sorry for Christian von Koenigsegg and Boraker. During the negotiations, they sat on one side of the table negotiating and making proposals. And on the other side of the table, there were 8, 10
lawyers?
Lawyers, yes, from GM who didn't know anything, who kept saying, okay, we'll note that and take it back with us. That was the only thing they said the whole time. I felt so sorry for them. They were fighting to make something happen, but
they did it.
And
you were part of those negotiations too?
Just a few times with technical support for certain things that I went through.
But what do you think? They're really going for it? They really want this? Christian and board? Yes.
They really do want it. Yes, they're probably still very positive about car manufacturing and getting more started in Sweden and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the end, the commitment just became too big. I think it was absolutely right to pull out because GM kept restricting more and more of the IP that was supposed to be transferred.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to use it. No.
In the end, it was really just a thumb's worth, actually. I think so. So I think it was absolutely right not to move forward. At first, it looked pretty good. It probably could have worked.
You think they could have pulled it off?
I think so. I mean, if you had access to all the 9 models and the cars that had been developed, because the 94X was developed completely new. Absolutely, it hadn't gone into production. It was in pre-production. The new generation 9-5, that one was in production. The wagon was the next step.
That one was finished too. Yes?
It was finished. 540, I don't know how much you could say was developed.
This one?
Yes, exactly. I would say that maybe 70 to 80% of the lead time had already been invested in it. So there was actually a lot invested in it. So it was really a new product line that was available.
Saab had actually never possessed such an impressive and diverse vehicle lineup when they eventually faced bankruptcy.
Exactly.
Never such good cars, such beautiful cars, and such new cars. You could say Saab has always just scraped by with old cars. Yes, exactly. But now everything was brand new and fantastic, really.
If you had gotten all those models and paid a reasonable price for the IP that came with it, then it probably could have continued. I believe that.
But what were people afraid of? But there wasn't a Chinese connection that people on the GM side were worried about.
There were a lot of twists and turns. I don't know all of them, unfortunately. People were a bit worried about their own interests, but I don't know if that was the main issue. I don't dare say.
What do you think Christian von Koenigsegg would have done with Saab? Would he have taken it in a certain direction? Or do you think he would have steered it towards electric cars? I don't dare say. Did you talk about technology and the future with him?
No, never. Not about that, no.
What did you discuss?
At that time, we didn't discuss much. But during the NEVS period, we've worked together a bit more.
Yes, but
It's been more about exchanging experiences and engineering solutions, a bit about things that are kind of bread and butter. I suppose you could actually call it that, much like an HVAC system. Ventilation systems and things like that. But
I know that you work a lot with Emily. Yes, it was actually him, and I think he also drove over there and looked at it himself. Since we are already talking here, could you perhaps say a few more things about Emily and your experience?
yes, I think that in itself,
Was really nice and modern.
yes, and the technology content is still interesting and there is still interest. It has been ever since we actually showed it. When you presented it the first time, we've had interested parties all along, and there are still people interested in buying these cars and the IP. But whether anything will ever come of it, that's doubtful. I've said at some point that there's a 50-50 chance, but some time has passed since then, and I think it's lower now. Lower chance, but
Who knows?
however, what I would also like to emphasize is that comprehensively included within all of these intellectual property rights and the various vehicles that currently exist, the Pons project is also fully included.
Yes, that's right.
With the Sango car, which is a self-driving car. And I do believe, on the other hand, that there is a much greater opportunity for success there, because that's something that's coming. I'm convinced that it will come to big cities with self-driving cars. And there aren't that many suppliers of that type of vehicle. The ones really pushing for this, the ones who want it, are the cities. But cities don't want to pay that much for it. And there are a lot of AD companies that do autonomous driving. But their expertise is really in making autonomous driving systems. It's not in making the car itself. And that's where there's a small gap. So there's an interesting case there, at least.
Hopefully something will come of it. But now let's dive into the electrical architecture.
Yes, then we'll leave that to Anders. We will.
Yes, we will. Thank you. Anders, you have really spent a significant amount of time getting this sophisticated new engine to communicate effectively with this classic old car, so to speak.
Yes,
Tell us about it.
exactly. In 2011, when the 9.5, the last generation of the model, was launched, GM had introduced a new electrical architecture they called Global A. And an electrical architecture, there are a lot of aspects to an electrical architecture. But one of the fundamental parts is really how different components, that is, electronic control units, communicate with each other. And back then, they usually did that using CAN messages. It's a technology that's still used today, but there are other technologies as well. But at that time, it was mostly CAN messages. Basically, we can say that the engine with its engine control unit speaks this new language that GM introduced. And that was one of these IP, but
This is not a standard GM engine.
exactly, but the electrical architecture was transferred to the control unit. Okay, so then they used the Global A architecture in the control unit.
But it's a GM control unit for a BMW engine.
The control unit is actually a Bosch because they are the supplier. Okay, but all the software in it, it's Bosch who developed it, but then the control unit communicates using the electrical and control architecture that GM developed. This does get a bit complicated.
Yes, it definitely seems to do that.
Basically, this one speaks the right language. The engine control unit
Understands.
Down here, we have the brake control unit, which handles ABS, traction control, and similar functions. It speaks a different language.
The old language.
A camera from the 9.3 that was in production at the time.
That's right.
And this means, for example, that I have to get them to talk to each other. I can't send the same cold messages as were in the old 9 to 3, because the new engine control unit won't understand them.
Then
So what I've actually done,
here we have a bunch of stuff.
exactly, and this is another project that I worked on.
Then here you can see the car as well. All the different sensors that handle brakes and whatever else it might be for. Wheels. I don't know what it is that it's doing. Speed sensors, and what else could it be?
This is actually a Saab 9.3,
Yeah, that's what I understood it to be.
but this part is a development board that you use to be able to develop new software that runs in this BCM unit that I have created. A BCM is actually found in all modern cars as well, and it manages what are usually called all the comfort functions. So lights, ignition, everything that has to do with any kind of input from the environment, it's involved in. So, for example, when I press the start button on the dashboard, it reads the signal from the start button, and then it sends a CAN message to the engine control unit. Now you should start the car.
Smart. And
What I've had to do is program it so that this one can communicate with both the new architecture, that is Global A, which, among other things, the engine control unit uses, and also with the rest of the car, which uses the old language. So I simply developed this BCM. I take a look at what they look like on the market. What is available? Did you make these things? Exactly. So I designed the entire circuit board. I developed the architecture with the right processors, all the power electronics needed to control the lights, and everything else required.
washer, here it says hazard lights. Horn, all sorts of things.
Exactly. I think you can divide it so that this is the part that actually sits in the car. This one I only use at my desk at home to develop the software and to be able to check that the software is doing the right things. But all the wiring goes into the control unit in the BSM, and then I can check the write code or the ring code in the BSM. And then I can use both the buttons to see that.
The BSM is doing the right things.
Exactly.
This isn't something you just do in an evening at home.
No, it takes a few evenings. It's also fun. It's an interest I've had for a long time.
Indeed it is.
Really the heart of this whole car to actually make it work. Otherwise, this car would never have been drivable. It would have just been a dead engine and a dead car.
I understand. Impressive. This was developed with the idea that you would use these. There are more engines than just these 8.
Yes, exactly. So this one is reproducible. The casing is just a CD print, but I have a whole bunch of these and I have all the drawings and everything, so I can just order new ones if I need to. And this was actually a side project that I had long before I started with this. The idea was that you could use this in hobby cars, like if you have an old Amazon or another car. And the electrical system is maybe a bit bad anyway. The cables might be falling apart, or if you want to update it with some new functionality.
So you could use this to build that?
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Got it.
And then you can connect all sorts of new things. So one thing we haven't mentioned about this, it's that this one doesn't have a physical key. It's my phone that's the key to it.
Oh, that's modern.
There are Polestar and many others. Yes, Tesla.
And all sorts of brands.
But you can add that to this one. So this BCM has Bluetooth support. It also has Wi-Fi support if you...
I really want it. That is awesome. Yeah, it's as modern as it should have been. When it came out in 2013 or so.
Exactly, that's right. All the software here, it's the latest release that was launched at the same time. And we can actually add the battery terminal here as well. This BCM then is actually responsible for making sure everything in this new instrument panel actually works. So if you turn on the ignition here, everything will start up. And this is the dashboard and the entire architecture then, or everything that's installed in the new model.
That's right. Can we turn on something more radical?
Well, we don't have any coverage in here right now, but everything here works.
It works, yeah.
Now I have a few error codes there, but that's because the ignition is on. And that's also an interesting thing. It's warning about an engine fault. And that's because in the new architecture, the engine control unit doesn't start up until you've turned on the engine, or until you choose to turn on the engine. So when you just turn on the ignition, the engine control unit stays in sleep mode, and then the instrument cluster complains about it. I'm in contact with the engine control unit. It's the little things that make up the big picture, but it's a fully drivable car. So
I think I'll go out and test drive this now. And drive it against the original one, so to speak, and see how much better Phoenix was.
I think so.
Or would have been, or is.
Yeah, I think you'll be impressed.
We can call it the Phoenix car.
Absolutely, we can do that. I haven't driven it a whole lot. I got it tuned in September last year, and I put it on the road about 2 weeks ago, so I haven't had the chance to drive it that much, but from what I've driven, you can really feel a huge difference. All the components, all the subsystems work together fantastically well. So the Saab team that worked on the development did a really great job.
Good, then let's get going and drive.